Hey, thanks for hitting the snooze button. I'm Neil Headley. I was prepared to write off a literal lifelong battle with insomnia to just being a part of doing more than 30 years of morning television and radio. When I dug a little deeper, it turned out there was far more to learn. So in this series, we try to help people fix their sleep by figuring out why mine is so horribly broken, and maybe we stumble upon some answers together. How much do you know about narcolepsy? Yeah, me neither. Narcolepsy is one of those things that I've seen portrayed in sitcoms and movies, and I didn't really understand, or at least it was that way. And I have to tell you, I feel like that changed to a certain degree when I was lucky enough to chat with this week's guest. Her name is Julie Flygare, and she is a force to be reckoned with as a tremendous advocate for people suffering with narcolepsy. She was generous with her time. She was generous with her answers, and she was also generous in giving us a bunch of copies of her book to give away. We'll talk about the book in just a little bit, and I'll tell you about the fun twist toward giving away her book as well at the end of the show. But in the meantime, I just want to get straight to it without any further delay. I want to introduce you to my new friend, Julie Flygare. Julie, I don't know if you're familiar with the show, but I'm nervous about even just right out of the gate here, because typically there is a first question that every single guest in the history of the show has gotten, whether you are a world-famous sitcom actor or if you are a world-class neuroscientist. But I'm nervous about asking you the question, so I'm just going to ask it. And if it turns out to have been a horrible error in judgment, can I ask for your forgiveness in advance?
Yes, and I know the question.
Okay, all right, so here it comes. How did you sleep last night?
I slept okay.
Okay, and that's a fair answer, because there's a million things went into that answer behind the scenes that I'm excited to dive into with you here, because people who are looking at their screen before they hit the play button saw the word narcolepsy, and so already know where this episode is going and what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to ask you to do a certain amount of hand-holding here for me, because really what I want to approach this from is the perspective of somebody who hasn't read your book, which, by the way, I have, somebody who hasn't, seen a million things from you on social media and all those things, which I have. And I want to take it right back to the beginning for people who don't know anything about narcolepsy at all. And so now we're back to the hand-holding. Can you give me a crash course on what narcolepsy even is?
Yeah, well, I really wasn't familiar with it either as the symptoms developed. And I think one of the most interesting things is that we all kind of often think that we know what narcolepsy is, and we think that it is somewhat of a joke about someone falling asleep in the middle of a sentence, or, falling asleep while they're standing. And that really never happened to me. So as my own symptoms developed, I was in law school, and I thought that I was just having trouble with the coursework for a long time, and that maybe I wasn't cut out for law school. And at the same time, my knees started buckling when I was laughing at jokes. And it was very particular and very strange. And so the first time I felt this, I thought, there's something wrong. Like, this is not normal. And that was around age 21, 22. And I asked many people about that, but couldn't find the answer for a while. And at the same time, I was having these experiences where I'd be asleep at night and think that I'd woken up and to a burglar coming into my apartment and attacking me, but I couldn't move to respond. And I thought that, hopefully those kind of experiences would go away. My brother had said that he had had some of those in college and it just went away. And so there was these kind of really different things happening in my life that ultimately I learned were all symptoms of narcolepsy. And so I think narcolepsy is a little bit confusing because there's actually 5 major symptoms, including the excessive daytime sleepiness. And I do get tired every day. But then the cataplexy, which is that when my knees were buckling when I was laughing, that was kind of a different part of my experience. And then when I thought a burglar was breaking into my apartment, that's a hypnagogic hallucination. And feeling like I couldn't move to respond to this burglar was sleep paralysis. And then the fifth major symptom is disrupted nighttime sleep, which really confuses people because they often think of narcolepsy as like, you can sleep all the time. But narcolepsy is a disruption of REM dream sleep in particular. It's a neurological condition, and it's these boundaries between being in dream sleep and being conscious that have somewhat gone haywire. And so aspects of dream sleep are actually happening during the day, and at night I might be more conscious than I should be, and not getting into the proper forms and the proper cycles of sleep at night. So it's kind of a complex condition. It's a very 24-hour condition in that it affects both your day and your night.
Okay, but let's wind the clock back to when all of this first started happening to you. I can only imagine, because there wasn't a you yet out advocating for narcolepsy when you were only 22 years old. I'm assuming it was judgment-palooza and that there wasn't a whole ton of support out there for you either.
I mean, when I didn't know what was going on, I tried Googling things and I never could find the right terms. And then once I did figure out, thankfully through a sports therapist, because I had a runner's knee injury at the same time. And I was talking to her about my knees and mentioned my knees buckling with laughter, even though it had nothing to do with my running. And she thought she'd heard of that, and that was called cataplexy. And so that's the little key that ended up helping me find the word cataplexy, which led me to find out that's a symptom of narcolepsy and read the real symptoms for the first time. And I'm so lucky. I feel so lucky that she made that connection for me. I don't know how many more years I would have gone because I was already asking other doctors and getting blank stares, which was really, really challenging. And then, once I did figure out what it was, there already was at least one, organization working on awareness efforts, and I was able to connect to them, which was actually a huge part of my journey for eventually finding support and community for myself. But yeah, I don't know if much has changed. I'd like to say I've made some big difference. I don't know if I have, but often a lot of people get kind of strange reactions. Either people think narcolepsy is so insignificant that it doesn't matter, like it's like a flu or something, or they think narcolepsy is so severe, like, oh my God, you're going to fall asleep like in the middle of doing anything, like you can't be trusted to do anything. And the truth is that narcolepsy is for most people somewhere in between. And it's different for everyone. And taking the time to explain to your loved ones, your friends, potential dates, what narcolepsy means to me, is still sort of like a process.
So we talk about community, and community implies the idea that there are potentially a bunch of other people going through the same thing that you're going through, and yet narcolepsy is a pretty rare condition, isn't it? I mean, how many people are we talking about that are in the same boat with you?
Well, they believe it's 1 in 2,000 people that have narcolepsy around the world. So it would be about 200,000 Americans and 3 million people worldwide. But similar to a lot of other sleep conditions, it's extremely underdiagnosed. So currently, only about 25% of the people who have narcolepsy in the U.S. are believed to be diagnosed. So you could say, actually, there's a much bigger boat of people that I share this condition with, but that only 25% of them even know it, which is part of the tragedy. And for those that are in the same boat as me, it took them an average of 8 to 15 years to find their proper diagnosis after their symptoms started. So I'm actually pretty lucky because it only took me about 5 years from the time that my symptoms started to get a proper diagnosis. But, so many of the advocates and fellow people with narcolepsy that I know went years, if not decades, with the symptoms without knowing what was wrong with them, and even getting misdiagnosed with other conditions like epilepsy or bipolar condition, and going on treatments for those disorders when they didn't even have them, as part of their journey towards finding their proper diagnosis. So I don't think it's quite as rare as people think it is. And the other thing is it's quite invisible. So often people say to me, you're the first person with narcolepsy I've ever met. And I'm really not so sure that's actually true. I'm just the first person that you realize you're meeting, because it also is such a stigmatized condition. There's so many misunderstandings. A lot of people do keep it private. And so you might have friends and neighbors and professors or, nurses or doctors that you've interacted with that have narcolepsy and you just didn't know it.
And there are varying degrees too, right? There are people who have more severe symptoms than others. And the person I think about when I ask this question, and it's interesting with so many medical conditions, if you can attach a famous person's face to it and a famous person will tell you what they're going through, then suddenly some of these things become easier to wrap your head around. And you already know whose name I'm going to bring up, but Jimmy Kimmel talks about having experiences with what he describes as very mild narcolepsy. So are there varying degrees for all kinds of people?
Well, it's kind of a complex question in that there are a few types of narcolepsy. So there's narcolepsy type 1, which is what I have, which is narcolepsy with cataplexy. So that, it's kind of a whole other layer of challenge to have to deal with if I experience emotions that my knees might buckle or that I might actually completely collapse to the ground. And so narcolepsy with cataplexy is often considered, a more severe version, I guess. And then there's narcolepsy without cataplexy. And those individuals can experience all the same symptoms of narcolepsy except for that cataplexy. However, you could say somewhat that might be less severe. And I think that's what Jimmy Kimmel possibly has a diagnosis with, is narcolepsy type 2. But there's also a very wide degree of people's responsiveness to medications. So I never would want to say that, narcolepsy type 2 is somehow less severe, because it's always individual in how you respond to treatments. And I know I would never consider myself an average case. I don't think there is an average case of any type of narcolepsy, but I have responded well to treatments. And for people that have more complicated situations or more severe side effects from the treatments, that also will impact how much the condition affects their functionality. So, yeah, it's interesting. Jimmy Kimmel has spoken a few times about it, but hasn't really, stepped forward as any sort of a spokesperson. And I am, you never want anyone to get narcolepsy by any means, but I'd love to see a prominent face that people would already recognize that might have a type 1 narcolepsy, because I do think that's an important part about educating people about the severity of the condition can have.
Well, and it's interesting that we're having this conversation while the world is in the middle of a pandemic, because, we talk about attaching a famous face to it. And it was when famous celebrities, Chris Cuomo from CNN is probably the example that jumps to mind most prominently. When Chris Cuomo from CNN was diagnosed with COVID-19 and was going through all of his stuff live on national television, there were piles of people who stood back and went, whoa, this is a serious thing. So in terms of famous faces, I mean, I know that Kurt Cobain had narcolepsy. And I start to think about all of the other various professions that put people in front of our faces every day, whether they're actors or musicians or whatever it is that they happen to be doing. Does narcolepsy in and of itself prevent people from having certain occupations?
Well, I think that the treatments have evolved, and so there are better treatments now. That I can't say that certain people won't be limited from certain professions, but in general, I would never say to anyone that someone can't be a world-class musician or a world-class athlete. We have examples of those. So we have a LPGA golfer, Nicole Giray. Maybe she's not a household name to everyone. She is to me as a huge role model who has narcolepsy with cataplexy. And George Church is worldwide known for the Genome Project, is a famous geneticist, and he has narcolepsy. And he's made such huge scientific discoveries as far as the genome. And so there are actually people that are doing incredible things. And we just highlighted on Project Sleep's website this past week was National Nursing Week. And so we highlighted nurses with narcolepsy. And so there are actually nurses on the front line of the COVID-19 pandemic who have narcolepsy. And there are doctors who have narcolepsy. There are lawyers. And so I do think that, not everyone maybe feels that their functionality is good enough to take on something so intense like that. But it's a complex issue of both the fact that narcolepsy can be quite severe, but also because there's so much misunderstanding that you might not know that certain people even have narcolepsy, and they might not speak publicly about it. Like certain doctors keep it quite private because they're afraid of being misunderstood and losing their jobs. So there's incredible amount of discrimination that's still happening for a lot of people in a lot of positions. But what you also said really reminded me of another important point is that we do look to celebrities, right? And we look to Hollywood. And so I think that because we haven't had a very accurate, strong celebrity, somewhat spokesperson in our community, we often look at movies. And so a lot of what people think of narcolepsy still to this day is based on movies like Rat Race, Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo, and Moulin Rouge. So, even though those are supposed to be just funny, comedic portrayals that are very inaccurate, there's nothing to counterbalance that in our society to say, well, actually, this is the real narcolepsy, besides people like me, but I'm not famous. So, I think that's that it's made those portrayals stick in people's minds as kind of the only thing we currently know about narcolepsy.
Okay, well, let's deal with the Deuce Bigalow thing right out of the gate, because if I'm thinking about the same movie, that's the one with the bowling scene in it, right?
Yes.
Okay, so if you haven't seen the movie, although a whole pile of people did, I wasn't one of them. But there is a scene in Deuce Bigalow where there's a woman bowling, and she has narcolepsy, and goes to roll the ball down the alley. You can tell I don't bowl very much. I mean, the closest thing I've ever gotten to bowling is watching a lot of Fred Flintstone. So there she is about to let go of the ball, but then she doesn't let go of the ball because she falls asleep in the middle of the process of letting go of the ball and ends up flinging herself down the alley. And by the time she hits the floor, she's already full on asleep. And you're absolutely right that if that for a ton of people is what they think narcolepsy is about, first of all, yikes. But let's get a couple of other basic things out of the way first, because what's depicted in that movie, that doesn't happen to people.
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. There's that scene, and there's a second scene in which the male gigolo character is trying to have a meal with her, and so he's tied her. She's having like a bowl of soup or something, and he's tied her long hair back against something so that as she falls asleep, her head won't fall into the bowl of soup.
Yikes.
And so I will say, narcolepsy, the severity of excessive daytime sleepiness can really vary. And some people do feel that it can come on quite quickly and that they might be even falling asleep while they're standing. It's not the most typical way that the sleepiness appears. The most typical way would be a much more invisible and slow process of feeling sleepy, while I'm typing notes, in a class, or while I'm doing spreadsheet work at work, and my eyes are open, but I'm just starting to lose my cognition. And I never completely collapse over asleep while I'm bowling or while I'm eating soup or anything like that. I might be tired while I'm bowling, and I might be tired while I'm eating soup, but I certainly, for the most part, me personally, and for most people with narcolepsy, it would be much more invisible, and it would affect our cognition, our memory. Maybe it would seem a little bit moody. Some of my friends say that they just think I'm kind of in a bad mood when I'm experiencing sleepiness. But the other symptom of narcolepsy that I described to you, cataplexy, I could be in the middle of a conversation. I could be laughing about something that's funny, and my body may become paralyzed. So that symptom, I may completely collapse to the ground And you might think I'm asleep because I am completely paralyzed. So I can't even, all my eyelids are closed, and I can't move a finger or a toe, but I'm conscious in my head. So I can actually hear what's happening around me, and I can feel my body's position, but I can't move. And so for that symptom, I could be in a very social setting and completely fall to the ground, but I wouldn't be asleep. I would be awake in my head, but unable to move, which is quite terrifying and not exactly quite as funny seeming as randomly falling asleep while you're, in the middle of a conversation.
Well, it's one more reason you're in a safe place here, because the incidences of someone actually laughing while they're having a conversation with me, it almost never happens. So I've gotten used to that over the course of my life. Okay, and my last dumb question from the category of, what is narcolepsy? How much on an average does a person with narcolepsy sleep more than someone else does? Or is it just broken up in different ways where sometimes the onset is unpredictable and et cetera, but you still, like a ton of other people do, get your 7 to 9 hours? It's just broken up way differently than my 7 to 9 hours.
Well, when I was unmedicated and before I knew what was wrong with me, I was sleeping. I knew I was a good sleeper. So I would sleep like 10 hours, but my body wasn't going to the right form. My body craved the REM sleep. And so I was going into way too much REM, but I wasn't getting enough of the stage 3 deep sleep. So technically I was like sleeping a long amount, but yeah, I wasn't going into the right forms. And then during the day I was having, my body again wanted to go into REM sleep during the day. And so I was having a lot of trouble getting through work. So I would say unmedicated, I definitely was probably sleeping way more than average. But then with treatment, I do take medication now twice a night and once a day. And so for the most part, I'd say I probably sleep about an average amount, 7 to 9 hours a night. And then I do take at least 1 or 2 naps every day that are pretty short, 15 to 30 minutes. But again, there's, it really varies as far as what people's experiences are. And that's just for me, that I think that I'm in a pretty good routine now with my treatments, that, I'm not, for the most part, not like sleeping 12 hours every day or anything like that. I do have to be just more careful with my time and my energy, because I do think I have more limited kind of like social energy. But so I don't think I sleep too much more than an average person now.
So what are you giving up in terms of, most medication for everything comes with some side effect or another. Is there something that you've had to accept as part of the treatment, and this is a trade-off you've chosen to make?
It was really challenging to adjust to the treatments at first, because with the nighttime medication that I take, they recommended to not drink alcohol really anymore. And so I was in law school and kind of like the party atmosphere, work hard, play hard was very much the law school atmosphere. So not drinking alcohol all at once was a big adjustment for me. And I wasn't able to eat 2 hours before taking the medication at night. And so, yeah, there were some really big adjustments, and I did have some pretty severe side effects at first, like stomach issues. And for my daytime medication, it's like a stimulant. So I would have like a lack of appetite during the day, but then not be able to eat too close to the night because of my nighttime medication. So adjusting to the treatments took me a few years. And also how to make it normal that, I took medication twice a night. For a while, I'd be afraid to share a hotel room with friends because, I would have to wake up in the middle of the night. And how would I handle that? Or, taking medication at night when you're dating and you're kind of dating someone new, like, do you bring your medication along on a date, or, assuming you're going to sleep over or not? So there's all sorts of at first it was really overwhelming to know, how is this going to be normal? But now I've been on the same treatment for 12 years and I'm so used to it. And a lot of the side effects, I found little tweaks to, make things better over time, I believe. And just through also talking to a lot of other people who are on the same treatment really, really helped me figure out how to make it more manageable. I've had, from my stimulants, I've had side effects of anxiety, But I didn't know for years that's actually what was happening to me. I'd heard the word anxiety, but I didn't really know what that was. I think I thought of it as like a panic attack. And it took like hearing someone else in a support group talking about anxiety as this like dark cloud of negativity that came over them, that I like all at once, this bell went off in my head and I was like, oh my God, that's what I've been experiencing for so long. And I had no clue that that was anxiety. And so then I was able to adjust that treatment to take a little bit less. So, yes, there are these balances you have to make between like getting a benefit from the drug, but making sure I don't take too much and start to have too many of the side effects. So there's a lot of balancing, but over time have definitely made a lot of improvements.
I love when I get to talk to somebody who gives me an answer that sparks 14 more questions, and you just did that. And so forgive me, I'm going to go mining for all of that because you gave me a ton to unpack. Let's talk about your daytime medication, which is a stimulant. For people who don't know what narcolepsy is about, and hopefully for a chunk of them that just changed, but for those who don't know what you're going through on a day-to-day basis, and the people who don't really understand it, who might look and go, well, what you need is a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Well, the sleepiness of narcolepsy is, it's so neurological. So it's a little bit deeper than what people might think of as average sleepiness. So when I feel sleepy, or a person with narcolepsy feels sleepy, they say it's like as if a person without narcolepsy had gone without sleep for 48 to 72 hours. So it would be a little bit like saying to you, stay up for 3 days, Neil, and you just need a cup of coffee. You can't stay awake after 72 hours? Have a cup of coffee, Neil.
Just suck it up and have some coffee, for crying out loud. Right? Yeah, no, I get it.
So yeah, we do take stimulants, and there's a wide variety now of options, which is nice. There's, so much drug development is happening in this space, thankfully. So, so there are different stimulant options, and they help somewhat more than coffee.
So what do we need to do? I mean, so much, this project for me, and I want to talk about Project Sleep in more detail in a second. This project that I'm in the middle of has taught me so much, but one of the things that it's taught me is that there are so many people in the world that need to get into a sleep lab who don't know that they get into a sleep lab. And part of the reason they don't know that they need to get into a sleep lab is because their doctor doesn't know that they need to get into a sleep lab, because most doctors are not trained in sleep science. And so they don't know what to look for. So what do we need to do in terms of the medical community for people who you're saying it takes them 12 to 15 years to figure out what their symptoms are, or 8 years or whatever, and you were lucky to figure it out after 5? What needs to change in the medical community for 5 years to be shortened down to an appointment or 2?
I'd say that there's 2 major challenges. It's both the medical community and it's also the public awareness. And both are pretty important. So for me, I went a few years where I didn't understand what was happening to me. So no doctor can solve that. Like if I can't even recognize that I'm having a problem with sleepiness, I can't bring it to a doctor. I couldn't articulate myself for years. And because it was so invisible, and it was so, I really honestly thought of it as like a willpower issue, or I'd lost my drive, or I wasn't cut out for law school. So to me, and I love this challenge of trying to get the public to understand that could actually be excessive sleepiness. It might not be narcolepsy, it might be a different sleep condition, but that is an important conversation, I think, to have with the public, because it's going to be through other people saying, oh my God, that's been happening to me for years. And I didn't even think that was something called sleepiness, or it could be a sleep disorder, especially in a culture which we haven't taken sleep very seriously in general. And so, it's good that there's a lot of people talking about sleep health now, but often when you might think that, like, I also thought for years, like, oh, I just thought it was my own fault, and that I wasn't, taking my sleep seriously enough, or, only if I hear people say like, oh, I'm going to get a Fitbit and I'll solve my sleep through a Fitbit. And so it's exciting that people are thinking more about sleep, but it's important that the conversation also includes sleep disorders and that people with sleep disorders are out there talking about their experiences so other people can say, oh my gosh, that's what's wrong with me. And then on the medical community side, once you bring a complaint to a medical professional, they just need to have, we don't need primary care doctors to be sleep specialists, but we need them to know that sleep specialists exist and that they can refer someone to a sleep specialist and to get a sleep study. And, I don't know how to solve that overnight. If I did, then Project Sleep wouldn't need to exist. But helping to bridge those educational gaps, I don't think there is any magical way to do that. It's just going to have to be through a lot of different efforts on educating medical professionals on all levels about sleep health and sleep disorders, and getting them to refer people that might have those conditions to sleep specialists, as opposed to what happened to me the first time I brought, when I went to a primary care doctor at the end of my first year of law school, and I said to her, I think I might have a sleep disorder. I was only familiar with sleep apnea at the time, and I hadn't really looked too much more beyond that. I didn't think, I knew I didn't snore. Now, of course, I know more about sleep apnea, that just because if you don't snore doesn't mean you don't have sleep apnea. But, I did say to her, I think I have a sleep disorder. And she asked me about my sleepiness, and I described it to her as, I was having trouble driving and doing my schoolwork. And then she said back to me, well, everyone gets tired sometimes. Even I have to pull over to get a coffee sometimes when I'm driving. And so at the time, I just remember the smallest voice in me, because I really didn't know how to compare her sleepiness to mine. I don't know how it felt to be in her body. I only knew mine. And I had been, going years of trying to figure this out. And so I just thought, I don't think we're talking about the same kind of sleepiness, but I really wasn't sure. And so I think that was a mistake, to kind of discard my complaint as a 23-year-old, high achieving law student. When I said, I think I might have a sleep disorder, I don't know why that was somewhat discarded as, that was normal. I've had other people say to me that's kind of a red flag, that something is pretty seriously going on. But yeah. So, she did want to check my thyroid and my iron. And I know that those are some common issues that can cause sleepiness. So, I think those probably were, from her perspective, good first steps. But she also really discouraged me when she said that seemed normal. And I think that's unfortunate.
It's like when you go to a doctor and their recommendation is eat less and exercise more. It's like, well, no, that's not a thing. It is for some people, but it's not a thing for everybody. Let's talk about Project Sleep for a second, because, that's quite a mountain to climb, because you talk about even the medical community and the things that need to happen there in terms of effecting change. But also, I see countless people complaining about their sleep problems on the interwebs, whether it's Reddit or Facebook or wherever they happen to be, venting that particular day. And I've said easily 300 times to somebody online, you should try and get booked into a sleep lab. And so many times, I would say at least 80, maybe 90% of the time, people will come back to me and say, my insurance doesn't cover it. So is it as well that we need to get perhaps the health insurance industry to recognize that sleep itself can just cause so many other problems and that they need to take it seriously too?
Yeah, possibly. That seems so challenging to even believe. It was really frustrating to hear. So that's a little bit news to me. I think that if you would go to a sleep specialist first and, have a evaluation with a sleep specialist, and the sleep specialist believed it was necessary that you have a sleep study, it would be really unfortunate that insurance would be the barrier. And so, there's definitely policy stuff that could be done to affect that on a systematic level. So that's a little bit new to me. I see people getting lost a little bit more in the primary care setting and never even getting to it seems to be also that I don't think that people realize how severe it is. It's like sleep is just like, oh yeah, well, we can deal with that next month. We can deal with that in 6 months. It's not thought that like, oh, that means if you delay someone from having a sleep study 6 months, that could be, and they work a full-time job and they commute across a city like LA every day, which takes an hour, to get anywhere. That is possibly, let's see, 6 months, that's twice a day, 5. I'm not a good mathematician, but that's hundreds of times that person's getting behind the wheel and could be putting themselves at danger and other people. And I don't think the severity of, how sleepiness could be quite a large safety issue, never mind quality of life and, all those other great things. But even as a safety issue that like they're putting people in serious danger.
Yeah,
and we see that because actually there's so many drowsy driving. We can't even quantify how serious drowsy driving is, I think, because so many people aren't even probably admitting it, but it's a huge, huge safety issue.
Well, and if people go back to episode 2 of this show with Dr. Adrian Owen, we talk about cognition, and you mentioned cognition as well. And it's not even the drowsy driver is the most obvious manifestation, but the impact to cognition from sleep issues is potentially even a bigger deal, because cognition is the hundreds of little decisions that you make every single day, including is now a good time to make a lane change. And you may not even look drowsy, but if you're taking a cognitive hit from not having gotten the right quality sleep and enough of it, then yeah, I mean, Dr. Owen put forward the idea that a driver who habitually gets 5 or 6 hours of sleep a night is potentially every bit as dangerous as a drunk driver on the road. And so there's a massive safety issue there. And I guess that's a good chunk of what is on the to-do list for Project Sleep, is making sure that people are aware of all this.
Yeah, it's a lot of different, we do advocacy. So we do, some different work to make sure that sleep health and sleep disorder awareness will get better funding in America. Right now, the CDC spends $0 on promoting sleep health and sleep disorders. There used to be a small program in this area, but it went away. And so we're advocating to get that funding back so that the society might be able to know a little bit about sleep health and sleep disorders. One of the comparisons I like to make is that I looked up, I believe the energy drink industry in America, that Americans spend about $6 billion a year on energy drinks. I'm not talking about coffee. I like my coffee. I'm not going to, go there. But I mean like Monster and Red Bull and those kind of beverages that I don't think like taste very good, and no one drinks them because they're fun. That's how tired people are, and that they're spending $6 billion a year, and an industry that has $6 billion to advertise that as a solution for your sleepiness, when there is not $1 being spent on a federal level to let people know that, hey, if you're sleepy, you might actually have an underlying condition that a Red Bull energy drink isn't going to solve. You need to go see a sleep specialist and get a sleep study. So we're trying to attack it on a policy level like that. But what drives me personally is the communications challenge. And what you just mentioned about cognition is one of the biggest reasons, if you look at Project Sleep's website, or, a lot of my efforts, you won't see a lot of people asleep, because I really am fascinated to get people to understand that sleepiness happens often with eyes open. And how can we, get people to understand that it's like looking through a fogged lens, or, losing your memories of certain moments, or being moody, but that's real sleepiness for a lot of people, as opposed to being asleep over your computer. So that's why you won't see a lot of images of, people sleeping in odd places in our materials, because I really hope to change that conversation and open people's eyes up to the wide variety of ways in which sleepiness affects you without actually being asleep. And the other thing I think is just the importance of bringing together the conversation of sleep health and sleep disorders. When I founded Project Sleep, I really felt that a lot of people were talking about sleep health and promoting good sleep habits. And I thought, that's fantastic. But often their articles would never even mention sleep disorders. And that really bothered me because I worried that people that might have sleep disorders are attracted to sleep health messaging, and think that only if they are using the next tips for average, how to get a good night's sleep on a listicle or something like that, that's going to solve their problem without ever knowing that sleep disorders exist. So Project Sleep is really trying to bridge that conversation, that both are important, but you need to know that sleep disorders exist.
Do you have an advocate in Washington? Is there, for example, a senator or a congressman who suffers from narcolepsy? I mean, statistically, there would have to be at least one, but is there anybody that's on your side?
We have champions, but we don't have any champions, any members of the House of Representatives or the Senate that have narcolepsy themselves. But we do have, I personally know of people that work in offices of senators and members of Congress that have sleep disorders themselves or have loved ones with sleep disorders. So through our efforts, we've actually been able to tap into some of those connections. And even my own representative is, really become a huge advocate for us and led a lot of our efforts just based on hearing my personal experience and knowing that sleep was an underdog condition that you just don't hear people talking about a lot. And so, it's been really fantastic that we've had advocates from across the country that have taken part in the efforts. And through that, we've been able to identify some offices that might be a little bit more susceptible to championing this effort, which is just really exciting.
You're funny. And that might sound like a weird thing to throw at you out of left field. I'll tell you why I noticed that you're funny. And I don't know how often people tell you that. For a long time, I spent 8 years on the road as a touring stand-up comic. And I used to work with a comedian by the name of Gord Painter. And Gord was blind. And Gord used his stand-up comedy as a way to raise awareness for blind people. And he would, for example, have someone walk him out on stage, and every night he would deliberately have whoever walked him out on stage face him toward the back of the room, the opposite direction from where the audience was. And what you watched happen, and I saw Gord perform and performed with him probably 300 or 400 times. And every single time I worked with Gord, here's what happened. There was the nervous laughter at the beginning from people sitting there visibly thinking to themselves and asking the question of themselves, should I be laughing at a blind guy? I don't know. Is this okay? And by the end of the show, everyone that you would talk to walked out of the venue saying, you know what, I have so much better of an understanding of what he's going through on a day-to-day basis now. I have a better sense of how to treat the people around me who are blind or visually impaired or what have you. And I would never have gotten the insight, pardon the expression, that I got into blindness had I not gone and seen Gord perform. And I think as well about another great comic named Gary Gullman, who had an HBO special out, I want to say about 8 months ago now, called The Great Depression. And Gary went from being one of the finalists on Last Comic Standing to his depression nearly driving him to suicide. And then at some point he decided, you know what, wait a minute, I can be a voice for depression by standing on stage and doing my act, but having all the material focus on depression itself and getting people to feel free to talk about it, remove some of the stigma, make people comfortable with the idea of having a discussion about depression and symptoms and all those kinds of things. And so when I say to you, Julie, you're funny, I'm just going to leave that there because I don't know if it's ever occurred to you to have that be part of your messaging is to, because you obviously are very well acquainted with humor. is to try and use humor to try and get people to wrap their heads around it a little easier?
Well, I love studying that. And I've actually gone to conferences where they look at different ways to affect social change. And so on an academic level, I know the power of comedy, that it can really, it can get people to talk about Syria, something like Syria. It's so serious and not a lot of people want to talk about it. And then, Samantha Bee can go and do a special on Syria, and it can really educate people because you use comedy as a vehicle to, do exactly what you said. It just allows people a way in. So I think what I'm really cognizant of my audience and knowing not to cause anxiety in my audience. And so through my own speaking, I think that there's humor in it. I wouldn't say I'm funny. I mean, not like stand-up comedy funny, but I like to, make self-deprecating jokes about my fashion sense as a kid. And I think all that just allows any listener to realize I'm just kind of like everyone else. And, so I definitely like to think that my presentations both make people laugh, but then also make them cry because I'll go to some of the dark places using storytelling as well. And so, but there's actually stand-up comedians that have narcolepsy. And one of my best colleagues in this space, Anna Marr, is an actress and a comedian who has narcolepsy herself. And she's developing a dark comedy TV series based on her experience as a comedian with narcolepsy, whose biggest trigger for her cataplexy is, laughter and thinking that she's funny. So it's, I'm really excited to see her develop her project because I think that there could be a lot of awareness that could be raised through it. Narcolepsy is such an interesting area with comedy, though, because of the inaccurate portrayals in movies like Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo. Right. And so you might think that I would say, well, comedy is terrible. But I think that the problem with those portrayals is they're just inaccurate. And so to me, they're not funny. It doesn't make me I watch Deuce Bigalow and I don't laugh because that doesn't resonate with my personal real experience. There are actually tons of funny things about living with narcolepsy, like dating. And there are funny things, but the Hollywood hasn't tapped into the actual experience. They've been based on misperceptions and stereotypes to this day, because I don't think Hollywood's worked with the community closely enough to develop actually funny material. So I really hope that'll change in the future, because there should be so many more. There could be many more funny and comedic ways to raise awareness. And I hope that we'll see a new generation of people doing that.
What's the easiest way for people to get involved and to help you with what you're doing?
Well, Project Sleep is our website, and there's, probably just the best is to get on our e-blast or our listserv, because we send out most of our notifications via email to, tune in for our live videos. We've been doing a lot of, especially now, we've been doing tons of live broadcasts, but also to know when there's going to be an advocacy alert, we email out, there's nothing all the time, but every few times a year, there's okay, take action now. And so we send those alerts out via our email and let people know on social media as well. And so either through social media or signing up for our listserv on Project Sleep's website is the best way to find out about what we're doing.
We're going to make sure that we link to that in the show notes. We'll make sure we link to the book, Wide Awake and Dreaming, which I absolutely loved. And Julie has been kind enough to offer some copies of Wide Awake and Dreaming for giveaway as well. So we'll give you details on that coming up on our website as well. There's just it's such a treat. I knew it was going to be a treat to talk to you. And we're connected to so many of the same people on social media. And I knew that I was going to both learn a ton and just enjoy the conversation. And I appreciate both things, Julie. Thank you for making time for this.
Of course. And thank you for doing what you're doing, because you are definitely making sleep cool, I think, through this podcast. So I really appreciate it.
See, I told you, force to be reckoned with, right? Julie Flygare, on the Snooze Button podcast. Mentioned in the show notes and on our website at thesnoozebutton.com, all the information about Julie's book, Wide Awake and Dreaming. And also, if you go to our freshly updated contests page at thesnoozebutton.com/contests, you can enter to win a personalized, autographed copy of Julie's book. And it's a remarkable offer. That's a new one for us. And like, that's one more reason why I said generous with her time. So again, thesnoozebutton.com/contests for details on that. Also on our website, links there to our social media profiles. You can leave us your feedback. You can leave a question for our panel of sleep experts. We've got a couple of those coming up in the weeks to come that we're going to get to. We got a bit of a backlog on our hands with that. And you can even support the show with a donation to help keep it commercial free and help keep new episodes coming. And remember, if you're crunched for time but you love the content, there are 9-minute versions of every episode with a different podcast called The Snooze Button Express. We're back next Monday with another guest and more to learn about sleep. Until then, my name's Neil Headley. Hey, get some sleep, would you?